The first time I whispered something filthy to Liam, it was a joke, a reckless, stupid impulse born from too much cheap beer and the kind of late-night courage that only comes when you're 19 and invincible. I leaned across our cramped dorm room, the air thick with the scent of his cedarwood body spray, and murmured words I'd never dare say to anyone else, knowing he couldn't hear me. His back was turned, his broad shoulders hunched over a textbook, oblivious to the chaos I was unleashing in my own head. We'd been roommates for barely a month at Hartwell University, a liberal arts college tucked into the rolling hills of upstate New York. I was Ezra Caldwell, the art major with paint under my fingernails and a tendency to overthink everything. Liam Harper was the opposite, a lacrosse star with a scholarship, a laugh that could fill a room, and a quiet confidence that made my stomach twist in ways I didn't want to name. He was deaf, communicating through a mix of sign language, lip reading, and texts tapped out on his phone. I'd picked up a few signs since we moved in. Hello, thanks, food. But I was clumsy, my hands fumbling where his were fluid. That first night, I was sprawled on my bed, a little drunk from a dorm party, watching him study. The room was a mess, my sketches pinned to the walls, his lacrosse gear strewn across the floor. I don't know why I did it. Maybe it was the way his t-shirt clung to his back, or the way he'd glanced at me earlier, his brown eyes catching the light like they held secrets. I leaned forward, my voice barely a breath, and whispered, "You have no idea how much I want to climb over there and mess you up." He didn't flinch, didn't turn, just kept highlighting his textbook, his pen moving in steady, deliberate strokes. Of course he didn't hear me, he couldn't. I laughed to myself, heart pounding, and sank back into my pillow, blaming the beer for the heat creeping up my neck. It became my secret game after that, whispering things I'd never say aloud if he could hear. Things like, "I wonder what your skin tastes like," or, "I bet you'd look good pinned against that wall." It was safe. He was deaf. My words were just air, vanishing into the space between us. But then, a week ago, he started looking at me differently. It was subtle at first, a glance that lingered too long, a half-smile that felt like it knew something. "Last night," I whispered, "I'd let you wreck me in a heartbeat," and his head tilted, just slightly, like he'd caught the vibration of my voice. His eyes met mine, sharp and searching, and for a second, I swore he understood. My pulse spiked, and I looked away, pretending to scroll through my phone. He didn't say anything, not with his hands, not with a text, just watched me, his gaze heavy, like he was peeling back layers I didn't know I had. The next morning, I woke to find him already gone, his bed neatly made, his lacrosse stick propped against the wall. I told myself I was imagining things. Liam was straight, probably. Guys like him always were. Broad-shouldered, charming, the kind of guy who could have anyone. Why would he look twice at me, the lanky kid who spent more time sketching than socializing? But the doubt gnawed at me, and by the time we crossed paths at the dining hall that afternoon, I was a mess of nerves. "Hey," I signed, my fingers stiff but passable. He grinned, his cap backwards as usual, and signed back, "Hey, you okay?" His hands were quick, graceful, and I fumbled my response, signing something that probably meant potato instead of fine. He laughed, a low, warm sound that hit me like a punch, and I wondered if he could see the way my cheeks burned. We sat together, picking at lukewarm pizza, the dining hall buzzing with students. I kept stealing glances at him, trying to read his face. Was he messing with me? Did he somehow know? I pushed the thought away, focusing on the sketchbook I'd brought along. I was working on a piece for my art class, a charcoal drawing of the campus quad, all sharp angles and soft shadows. Liam leaned over, curious, and pointed at the page. "You're good," he signed, his expression earnest. "Really good. Thanks," I mumbled, my voice barely audible. I wanted to say more, to ask why he'd been looking at me like that, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I flipped to a blank page and started sketching him. His jawline, the curve of his ear, the way his cap cast a shadow over his eyes. He didn't notice at first, too busy texting someone, but when he glanced up and saw the drawing, his face softened. He didn't sign anything, just watched me work, and the air between us felt charged, like a storm waiting to break. That night, back in our room, I couldn't stop myself. He was sitting on his bed, scrolling through his phone, and I whispered, "I want to know what it's like to kiss you." The words were reckless, louder than I meant, and his head snapped up. His eyes locked on mine, and for a heartbeat, I thought he'd heard me. But he just smiled, a slow, curious curve of his lips, and signed, "What are you thinking about?" I froze, my heart hammering. "Nothing," I said, too quickly, and buried my face in my sketchbook. But as I pretended to draw, I could feel his gaze on me, steady and unyielding, like he was trying to figure me out. And for the first time, I wondered if my secret game wasn't so secret anymore. The days after that night felt like walking on a tightrope. Every glance Liam shot my way, every brush of his shoulder as we passed in our tiny dorm room, sent my pulse racing. I told myself to stop the whispers, to quit playing a game that was starting to feel dangerous, but the words kept slipping out, like they had a life of their own. It was mid-October now, the campus draped in a riot of red and gold leaves. Hartwell's quad was alive with students tossing frisbees or sprawled on blankets, soaking up the last warm days before winter. Liam and I had fallen into a rhythm, me sketching or painting in one corner of our room, him studying or watching game replays with subtitles on his laptop. But the air between us had shifted, charged with something I couldn't name. I caught him watching me more often, his eyes lingering on my hands as I drew or my lips as I spoke. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was something heavier, something that made my chest ache. One evening, we ended up at a campus coffee shop, a cozy spot called The Grind with mismatched chairs and fairy lights strung across the ceiling. I dragged Liam along, claiming I needed caffeine to finish a project, but really, I just wanted to be around him somewhere other than our room. He ordered a black coffee, signing his order to the barista with a charm that made her blush. I fumbled through my own order, distracted by the way his hands moved, confident, precise, like they could tell a story without words. We sat by the window, the glass fogging up from the chilly night outside. I was sketching again, this time a quick study of the barista's espresso machine, all sleek lines and steam. Liam tapped my sketchbook, signing, "Show me something you've drawn lately." I hesitated, then flipped to the page with his portrait, the one I'd started in the dining hall. His eyes widened, and for a second, I thought I'd screwed up, exposed too much. But then he smiled, a slow, warm thing that made my stomach flip. "You make me look better than I am," he signed, his fingers brushing mine as he handed the sketchbook back. The touch was brief, accidental, but it burned through me. I wanted to grab his hand, to hold on, but I just nodded and looked away, pretending to focus on my coffee. That night, back in our room, the whispers came again. He was changing into a t-shirt, his back to me, and I couldn't stop staring at the way his muscles shifted under his skin. "I want to run my hands over every inch of you," I whispered, my voice barely audible. He didn't turn, didn't react, but when he climbed into bed and flicked off his lamp, he looked at me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I was losing my mind. The next day, things got weirder. We were at a lacrosse practice, me in the bleachers, sketching the players as they ran drills, him on the field, all focus and power. I wasn't supposed to be there, but Liam had texted me to come, saying it'd be cool to have someone cheer him on. I watched him move, his body a study in strength and grace, and I whispered under my breath, "God, you're so fucking hot out there." It was stupid, reckless, but the bleachers were empty, and the wind carried my words away. Or so I thought. When practice ended, Liam jogged over, sweat glistening on his forehead, and signed, "You were watching me pretty close." His grin was teasing, but his eyes were sharp, like he was searching for something. I laughed it off, signing, just drawing, but my hands were shaking. He tilted his head, studying me, and for a second, I swore he was about to say something more. But then a teammate called him over, and the moment broke. Back in our room that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that he knew. It was impossible. He couldn't hear me, and I'd been careful, hadn't I? But the way he looked at me, the way he leaned a little closer when we talked, made me question everything. I started signing more, trying to bridge the gap between us without giving myself away. I learned tired, hungry, happy, practicing until my fingers ached. Liam was patient, correcting my clumsy signs with a laugh, his hands guiding mine into the right shapes. Every touch felt like a spark, and I wondered if he felt it too. By the end of the week, I was a wreck. I stopped whispering the dirty things, scared I'd slip up in a way that wasn't safe anymore. But the silence didn't help. If anything, it made the tension worse, like the air was too thick with everything I wasn't saying. Liam noticed, of course. He always noticed. One night, as we sat on our respective beds, him reading and me pretending to draw, he set his book down and signed. "What's wrong? You're quiet." I laughed, a nervous sound, and signed back, "Just tired." But he didn't buy it. He slid off his bed and sat on the edge of mine, close enough that I could feel the warmth of him. "Talk to me," he signed, his eyes locked on mine. "I'm your friend." Friend. The word hit like a bruise. I wanted to be more than that, but how could I say it? How could I risk ruining what we had? I just nodded, forcing a smile, and signed, "I'm fine." But as he went back to his bed, his gaze lingered, and I knew this wasn't over. The tension in our dorm room was a living thing now, curling around us like smoke. I stopped the whispers entirely, but it didn't matter. Every look Liam gave me felt like he was reading my thoughts, peeling back the layers of my carefully guarded secret. I threw myself into my art, hoping it would distract me, but every sketch turned into him, his hands, his eyes, the curve of his smile. It was late October, and Hartwell was gearing up for its annual Fall Fest, a campus-wide event with bonfires, live music, and booths selling everything from homemade cider to knitted scarves. Liam insisted we go together, signing, "You need to get out of this room, Ezra. You're turning into a hermit." His teasing grin made my chest ache, and I couldn't say no, even though crowds made me twitchy. The festival was chaotic, the quad packed with students and locals, the air thick with the smell of roasted marshmallows and wood smoke. Liam was in his element, laughing and signing with friends from the lacrosse team, his energy magnetic. I trailed behind, clutching my sketchbook like a shield, trying not to stare at the way his flannel shirt hugged his shoulders. At one point, he grabbed my wrist, pulling me toward a booth where a student was selling glow-in-the-dark bracelets. "Pick one," he signed, his eyes bright. I chose green, and he picked blue, snapping it onto my wrist with a grin that felt too intimate for the crowded setting. We ended up by the bonfire, sitting on a blanket someone had abandoned. The flames cast flickering shadows across his face, and I couldn't stop myself from sketching him again. His profile sharp against the firelight, his cap tilted back. He noticed, of course, and leaned closer, signing, always drawing me. "Why?" I froze, my pencil hovering over the page. "You're interesting," I said aloud, knowing he'd read my lips. His eyes narrowed, like he was trying to puzzle me out, and then he signed, "You're interesting too." The words were simple, but the way he looked at me, steady, unflinching, made my heart stutter. Later, as we walked back to our dorm, the campus quiet except for the crunch of leaves under our feet, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to break. Liam was quieter than usual, his hands still in his pockets instead of signing. When we got to our room, he sat on his bed and looked at me, his expression serious. "Ezra," he signed, "why do you keep pulling away?" I didn't know how to answer. My hands fumbled as I signed, "I'm not." But it was a lie, and he knew it. He stood, crossing the small space between us, and sat on my bed again, closer this time. "You're scared," he signed. "Why?" My throat tightened. I wanted to tell him everything. The whispers, the longing, the fear that I was falling for someone who couldn't want me back. But I just shook my head, my hands useless at my sides. He reached out, his fingers brushing my arm, and the touch was so gentle it hurt. "You can tell me," he signed. "I'm here. I don't know what possessed me, but I grabbed my sketchbook and flipped to a page I'd hidden from him. A drawing of us, not just him. It was rough, unfinished, but it showed us sitting together, his hand on mine, our faces close. I shoved it toward him, my heart pounding so loud I was sure he could feel it. His eyes widened as he studied the drawing, and when he looked up, there was something new in his gaze, something raw and unguarded. "Is this how you see us?" He signed, his hands slow, deliberate. I nodded, my mouth dry, and for a moment, we just stared at each other. Then he leaned closer, his breath warm against my cheek, and I thought he might kiss me. But he didn't. He just signed, "I need to think," and went back to his bed, leaving me sitting there, my sketchbook open like a confession. The next few days were torture. Liam didn't bring up the drawing, but he didn't pull away either. He was still his usual self, laughing, signing, dragging me to the dining hall or study sessions. But there was a new weight to his glances, a question in his eyes that I didn't know how to answer. I stopped sketching him, afraid of what else I might reveal, but the urge to draw him was constant, like an itch I couldn't scratch. One night, after a long day of classes, we ended up studying together in the library. The place was nearly empty, just the hum of fluorescent lights and the occasional rustle of pages. I was working on an essay, my laptop screen glowing, when Liam slid a note across the table. It read, "I've been thinking about your drawing. Can we talk?" My stomach dropped. I nodded, and we packed up, heading back to our dorm in silence. When we got there, he sat on my bed again, his hands restless. "I don't know what this is," he signed, his face flushed. "But I feel it too." My breath caught, and before I could stop myself, I whispered, "I'm falling for you, Liam." His eyes flicked to my lips, and for the first time, I was certain he'd understood. The air in our dorm room felt like it could ignite. Liam's eyes were locked on mine, his chest rising and falling like he'd just run a sprint. I'd whispered the truth. "I'm falling for you, Liam." And even though I knew he couldn't hear the words, the way he looked at me said he'd caught every syllable on my lips. He didn't sign anything at first, just sat there, his hands clenched in his lap. I wanted to bolt, to take it all back, but there was no undoing it now. My sketchbook lay open between us, the drawing of us together a silent witness to my confession. Finally, he raised his hands, slow and deliberate. "Say it again," he signed, his eyes intense. "I want to be sure." My mouth went dry. I leaned closer, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'm falling for you. I've been falling for you since the day we met." His gaze didn't waver, and for a moment, I thought he might pull away, tell me I'd misread everything. But then he reached out, his fingers grazing my jaw, and my heart stopped. His touch was soft, hesitant, but it set every nerve in my body alight. "Ezra," he signed, his hands trembling slightly. "I don't know what I'm doing, but I feel something when I'm with you." He paused, his eyes searching mine. "It's new. It's scary, but I don't want it to stop." I couldn't breathe. I'd spent weeks convincing myself he was out of reach, that my whispers were just a game, a way to cope with feelings I couldn't act on. But now he was here, inches away, saying he felt it too. I wanted to kiss him, to close the distance between us, but fear held me back. What if this was a mistake? What if I ruined everything? Before I could spiral further, Liam made the choice for me. He leaned in, his lips brushing mine, soft and tentative. It wasn't a kiss, not yet, just a question, a possibility. I froze, then leaned into him, my hands finding his shoulders. The kiss deepened, slow and searching, and it was like the world narrowed to just us. The warmth of his mouth, the way his hands gripped my shirt like he was afraid I'd disappear. When we pulled back, both of us were breathing hard. Liam's eyes were wide, like he couldn't believe what we'd just done. He signed, "Was that okay?" And I laughed, a shaky, relieved sound. "More than okay," I said, knowing he'd read my lips. I signed, "Perfect," my hands clumsy but earnest, and his smile was brighter than the bonfire at Fall Fest. The next few days were a blur of stolen moments. We didn't talk about what we were, boyfriends, friends, something else, but we didn't need to. We'd sit close on my bed, his knee pressed against mine, or he'd linger when he handed me a coffee, his fingers brushing mine. I started signing more, picking up phrases like "I like you" and "stay close." He taught me with patience, laughing when I botched a sign, his hands guiding mine into the right shapes. Every touch felt like a promise, and I was dizzy with it, like I was falling and flying at the same time. But it wasn't all easy. I caught the way some of his teammates looked at us when we walked across campus together, their glances sharp and curious. Hartwell was progressive, but not everyone was kind, and I knew Liam felt it too. The weight of eyes, the unspoken questions. One afternoon, as we grabbed lunch in the dining hall, a guy from his team, a hulking junior named Connor, made a comment I didn't catch. Liam's face tightened, and he signed something sharp back, his hands moving fast. Connor laughed, but it wasn't friendly, and I felt a knot in my stomach. What was that about? I signed when Connor walked away. Liam shook his head, his jaw set. Nothing worth repeating. He signed, but his eyes were dark. I wanted to push, to ask more, but he changed the subject, pointing at my sketchbook and signing, "Draw me something happy." So I did. A quick sketch of us by the bonfire, our hands linked, the flames bright behind us. He smiled when he saw it, but it didn't reach his eyes. That night, back in our room, I couldn't hold it in anymore. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice soft. He read my lips, his expression guarded. "It's nothing," he signed, but I shook my head, stepping closer. "Tell me," I said, signing "please." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Some guys on the team, they're talking about us. They saw us at Fall Fest, holding hands." He paused, his hands hesitating. "They're not all okay with it." My stomach sank. I'd known this was coming, but it still hurt. "Do you care?" I asked, my voice trembling. He looked at me, his eyes fierce. "Not about them," he signed. "But I care about you. I don't want you to get hurt." I reached for his hand, holding it tight. "I can handle it," I said, signing, "We can handle it." He nodded, but the worry didn't leave his face, and as we sat there, hands clasped, I knew this was only the beginning. The weeks that followed were a tightrope walk between bliss and fear. Liam and I were something now, something real, something fragile. We didn't label it, but we didn't need to. It was in the way he'd pull me close when we were alone, his lips finding mine in the dark of our dorm room, or the way I'd catch him smiling at me across the quad, like I was the only person in the world. But the whispers from his teammates didn't stop. They weren't overt. No slurs, no confrontations, but the sidelong glances and hushed conversations when we walked by were enough to make my skin crawl. Liam brushed it off, signing, "They'll get over it," but I could see the strain in his eyes, the way his shoulders tensed when we passed certain guys from his team. I wanted to protect him, to tell them to back off, but I was just the artsy kid with a sketchbook, not exactly intimidating. One night, we went to a party at a frat house off campus, a sprawling Victorian with peeling paint and thumping music. Liam had been invited by his teammates, and he'd convinced me to come, signing, "It'll be fun. We need to get out." I wasn't so sure, but I went for him, sticking close as we navigated the crowded rooms. The air was thick with the smell of beer and sweat, and I felt out of place, my sketchbook tucked under my arm like a security blanket. Liam was different here, more guarded, his smiles tighter. He stayed by my side, signing quick translations of conversations when I got lost in the noise. But then Connor, the same guy from the dining hall, appeared, a red cup in his hand and a smirk on his face. He said something to Liam, too fast for me to catch, and Liam's face hardened. He signed something sharp back, his hands slicing through the air, and Connor laughed, loud and mean. I grabbed Liam's arm, pulling him toward the door. "Let's go," I said, my voice low. He nodded, but his jaw was tight, and as we stepped outside into the cold night air, he signed. He asked if we were a couple. I told him yes. My heart swelled, but it was tinged with fear. "What did he say?" I asked, signing, "What happened?" Liam's hands hesitated. He said it's weird, that I'm confused. He looked away, his face shadowed. "He's wrong, Ezra. I know what I feel. I took his hand, squeezing it. I know too, I said, signing, I'm with you. He smiled, but it was fragile, and as we walked back to campus, I couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to get harder. The next day, Liam had a lacrosse game, a big one against a rival school. I sat in the bleachers, sketching the action, my eyes on him as he tore across the field. He was brilliant, all power and precision, but I noticed Connor and a few others keeping their distance, their passes to him sloppier than usual. After the game, which Hartwell won, Liam jogged over, his face flushed with victory. But when I signed, "You were amazing," he just nodded, his smile faint. Back in our room, he was quiet, sitting on his bed with his elbows on his knees. I sat beside him, my heart pounding. "Talk to me," I said, signing, "What's wrong?" He sighed, his hands moving slowly. "They're freezing me out. Not all of them, but enough. They don't pass to me like they used to. It's because of us." I felt like I'd been punched. "This is my fault," I said, my voice breaking. He shook his head, signing, "No, it's theirs. They're the ones who can't handle it." But I could see the hurt in his eyes, the weight of being caught between his team and me. That night, I didn't whisper anything. Instead, I reached for his hand, pulling him close. We kissed, slow and desperate, like we were trying to hold on to something that might slip away. When we pulled back, he signed, "I don't regret this." "I don't regret you." I nodded, my throat tight, and signed, "Me neither." But as we lay in our separate beds, the darkness heavy between us, I couldn't stop thinking about what this was costing him. Lacrosse was his life, his scholarship, his future, and I was the variable that didn't fit. I wanted to be brave, to tell him we could face this together, but doubt crept in, cold and sharp. What if I was asking too much? What if loving him meant letting him go? The next morning, I woke to find a note on my desk, written in Liam's neat handwriting. "Meet me at the quad at noon." I have an idea. My heart lifted, but the fear didn't fade. Whatever he was planning, I knew it would change everything. Noon came too fast. I stood in the quad, the autumn sun high and bright, my sketchbook tucked under my arm like a shield. Students milled around, some heading to class, others lounging on the grass, but my eyes were fixed on the path where Liam would appear. His note had been vague. "I have an idea," and my mind was a mess of hope and dread, wondering what he was planning. He showed up right on time, his lacrosse bag slung over one shoulder, his cap backwards as always. But there was something different in his stride, a determination that made my chest tighten. He grinned when he saw me, signing, "You look nervous." I laughed, signing back, "Because I am." He took my hand, his grip firm, and led me toward the arts building, where my latest project, a series of charcoal portraits, was on display for a student showcase. Inside, the gallery was quiet, just a few students and professors wandering among the pieces. My portraits were hung along one wall, stark black and white studies of faces around campus. But the centerpiece was the one of Liam, the one I'd shown him weeks ago, his profile sharp against the bonfire's glow. I'd added to it since, refining the lines, capturing the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. It was raw, intimate, and seeing it on the wall, under the gallery lights, felt like exposing my heart to the world. Liam stopped in front of it, his expression unreadable. "This is us," he signed, his hand steady. "You put us out there for everyone to see." I nodded, my throat tight. "I didn't know if you'd be okay with it," I said, signing, "I can take it down." He shook his head, his eyes fierce. "No, leave it. I want them to see." Before I could ask what he meant, he took my hand again and led me outside, back to the quad. A small crowd had gathered near the main stage, where the Fall Fest organizers were setting up for another event. Liam climbed onto the stage, pulling me with him, and my stomach dropped. "What are you doing?" I hissed, but he just grinned, signing, "Trust me." He faced the crowd, his hands moving fast as he signed, "I'm Liam Harper. Some of you know me from lacrosse. Some of you know me as the deaf guy. But I want you to know me as someone who's not afraid to be himself." He paused, glancing at me, and my heart was pounding so loud I could barely think. "This is Ezra," he signed, his hands steady. He's my boyfriend, and I'm proud of that. The crowd was silent for a moment. Then a few people clapped, the sound growing into a wave. I stood there, frozen, as Liam took my hand, his grip warm and sure. Some of his teammates were in the crowd, Connor among them, his face unreadable, but Liam didn't look at them. He looked at me, his eyes bright, and signed, "I'm done hiding." We stepped off the stage, and the world felt different, like the air was lighter. A few students came up to us, offering smiles or quick signs of support. But Connor and a couple others hung back, their expressions cold. I squeezed Liam's hand, signing, "You didn't have to do that." He shook his head, signing, "Yes, I did. For me. For us." That night, back in our room, we didn't talk about the stage or the crowd. We just sat on my bed, his head resting on my shoulder, my sketchbook open between us. I drew him again, this time with the stage in the background, his hands raised in defiance. He watched, his fingers tracing the lines of my drawing. And when he kissed me, it was slow and certain, like he was claiming something he'd fought for. But the fallout came fast. The next day at practice, Liam came back to the dorm with a split lip, his eyes dark with anger. "Connor," he signed, his hands sharp. He didn't like what I said. Things got heated. I grabbed a cloth, dabbing at the blood, my hands shaking. "Did you fight him?" I asked, signing, "What happened?" "He swung first," Liam signed. I didn't back down. He tried to smile, but it was strained, and I could see the toll this was taking. Lacrosse was his world, and now it was cracking under the weight of who he was. I wanted to fix it, to make it okay, but all I could do was hold him, my arms tight around him as he leaned into me. "We'll figure this out," I whispered, knowing he couldn't hear, but hoping he'd feel it. He pulled back, signing, "I know." But as we sat there, the future felt like a storm on the horizon, and I wasn't sure we were ready for it. The days after Liam's declaration on the quad were a whirlwind of highs and lows. The campus buzzed with talk, some supportive, some cruel, but Liam held his head high, his defiance a shield. I was proud of him, but I was scared too. The split lip from Connor wasn't the end of it. At practice, the team's dynamic shifted. Some players rallied around Liam, others kept their distance, and Connor's crew made it clear they weren't backing down. I threw myself into my art, using it to process the chaos. My sketchbook filled with images of Liam, his hands signing, his eyes fierce, his smile soft in the moments we stole together. But I also drew the tension, faceless teammates glaring, a cracked lacrosse stick, a stage under harsh sunlight. My professors praised the emotion in my work, but I couldn't tell them it was my life spilling onto the page. One evening, Liam came back from practice quieter than usual. He dropped his bag, sat on his bed, and stared at the floor. I knelt in front of him, signing, "What's wrong?" He hesitated, then signed. "Coach pulled me aside. Said the team's distracted. Said I need to keep my personal life out of it." His hand shook slightly. "I might lose my scholarship if things don't calm down." My heart sank. "That's not fair," I said, signing, "They can't do that." But we both knew they could. Hartwell was progressive on paper, but scholarships were about results, not ideals. Liam shrugged, signing, "I don't regret it. But it's hard." I reached for his hand, holding it tight, and for the first time, I felt the weight of what we were up against. Not just people, but systems, expectations, the world. The next day, I found Connor outside the dining hall, leaning against a wall with his arms crossed. I don't know what made me approach him. Maybe anger, maybe desperation, but I did. "You need to back off," I said, my voice steady despite the way my hands shook. He raised an eyebrow, smirking. "You're the one causing problems, artist boy. Liam was fine before you." "He's still fine," I snapped. "Better, even. Because he's not hiding who he is." Connor's smirk faded, and for a second, I thought he might hit me. But he just shook his head and walked away, leaving me with a sinking feeling that this wasn't over. That night, Liam and I sat on the quad, the campus quiet under a blanket of stars. He'd brought a blanket, and we lay on it, side by side, our hands linked. "I've been thinking," he signed, his face lit by moonlight. I don't want to lose lacrosse, but I don't want to lose you either. I squeezed his hand, signing, you won't lose me. We'll fight for this. He nodded, but his eyes were distant. Then he signed, I want to tell you something. He paused, his hands hesitating. I've known I liked guys for a while, but I never acted on it. Never thought I could. Until you. My breath caught, and I signed me too. You're my first everything. He smiled, a real one this time, and kissed me, soft and slow, like we had all the time in the world. But we didn't. The next week, Liam was benched for a game, officially for team cohesion, but we both knew why. He didn't complain, just signed, I'll prove them wrong. And he did, working harder at practice, his focus razor sharp. Slowly, some teammates came around, passing to him again, clapping him on the shoulder after drills. But Connor and his group didn't budge, and the tension lingered. I decided to fight in my own way. For my final art project, I created a series called Unheard Voices, portraits of Liam, of US, of moments that felt like ours but spoke to something bigger. The showcase was packed, students and faculty filling the gallery. Liam stood beside me, his hand brushing mine, as people studied the work. A professor asked what inspired it, and I signed love, and the courage to live it. Liam's eyes shone, and he squeezed my hand, signing, you're incredible. The semester ended with no easy answers. Liam kept his scholarship, but the team was still fractured. Connor never apologized, but he stopped pushing, and that was enough for now. We weren't naive. There would be more fights, more stares, more moments where the world felt too heavy. But we had each other, and that was a start. On our last night before winter break, we lay in my bed, the room dark except for the glow of my laptop. I whispered, I love you, Liam, knowing he couldn't hear but needing to say it. He turned to me, his eyes soft, and signed, I love you too. My heart stopped. He'd read my lips, or maybe he'd always known. We kissed, and for the first time, I believed we could face whatever came next, together.